And Sarah, I want to come back to you because data quality is always a huge concern for both companies and regulators as well. Any insights on that in terms of the APAC region, and more specifically, are there differences between the countries, say China, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, depending on which country we look at? Are there differences in data quality that folks should be concerned about?
I think this is sort of based on my regulatory experience on filings in countries like US and for Europe for global products, and as well as in Japan. Um, I'm not too concerned about data quality. If you have a good monitoring plan, you have a same protocol, and you have a good CRO or clinical monitoring oversight, I think the data you can collect in those clinical trials are quite robust in number of different countries. In some ways, some of these countries, you would think, I think, example of Korea, I would say, the digital data capture, the patient record, and then those are number of universities are very well connected, and then actually very robust way of capturing sort of patient data beyond what you collected in your clinical trials and the forms. So again, some of these countries that quite advanced in the digital data captures in through national health system and others. Again, what I've seen is data collection, quality of data is quite robust, and then also oversight by clinical monitoring group, whether it's your own a company or CROs. I think if they have a certain quality of standard, I have not seen us quality of data being issued for sort of a regulatory approval. Oftentimes, what we talk about is sort of related to some of the questions and other parts. Standard care, medical standard care, or what's considered standard care for that particular disease, and then area might be different from country to country. So again, those things are before you start conducting clinical trials, you can have a conversation with the health authority. What will be appropriate, standard care to be offered in trials, and then overcoming some difference of a standard care from the countries. But again, that does not impact on, let's say, quality output of data that base it on I've seen in some regulatory interactions.
And I'm going to stick with you again because Mohammed just asked a question. In China and Japan, does a phase 1 study need to be conducted in a certain country in order to do other phases of the trial? Is there any regulatory requirement in that regard that you're aware of?
So in ideal situation, obviously you want to do phase 1 healthy volunteer study to inform, later phase 2 and phase 3 trials. However, for requirement for having a healthy volunteer phase 1 study in China for Chinese filing, or Japan for Japan sort of a marketing application registration filings, are sort of a regulatory requirements. So oftentimes in China, you could go with other regions' phase 1 data to conduct, let's say, phase 2 or phase 3 trials in China. But in order to have a marketing application submitted, you have to collect Chinese phase 1 healthy volunteer data. So it's a little bit against the logic, but it was more of a regulatory requirement to collect those data. But it doesn't have to be standalone China healthy volunteer study anymore. If you discuss with the health authorities, they may be able to accept sort of a East Asian studies, but having a few Chinese patients, Chinese patients or Chinese healthy volunteers being involved, and then that data might be sufficient for Chinese health authority. Go to Japan. Japan is a little bit different. They do want to see phase 1 data from Japanese population before you goes into phase 2 or phase 3 trials in Japan. However, does not need to be in sequence. Let's say you have a healthy volunteer data from Western population for conducted outside of Japan in, let's say, US or European countries. You can leverage those data and then adding the argument why ethnic difference, genetic difference may not be impacting this particular modality, then you don't have to conduct the phase 1 healthy volunteer uh, uh, study in Japanese population before you proceeding phase 2 or 3. So for example, you can leverage the data, you can say it could be bridged, you can have a consultation with the PMDA, and then commit to collecting additional PK data while you are in sort of, let's say, phase 2 or phase 3 trial. So it might be a sub study within your phase 2, 3, but it doesn't have to be strictly prior to. I don't know if that explains it. So slight difference, but again, what I recommend is the requirement is evolving and how agencies willing to collect the data is evolving. So what I'm regulatory expert perspective, I would say having that consultation with those health authorities and how you intend to satisfy regulatory requirement from what data, whether it's a bridging approach or collecting it concurrently in your phase 2, 3 trial is a valid discussion to have.